Welcome to Plot Recon, where thrillers get tactical. I'm your host, Evan Graver. Today, I'm joined by MJ Witt, an apocalyptic and survival thriller author. Before turning to writing, he worked a lot of different jobs, including wilderness outfitter, scuba instructor, and he trained dolphins for the U.S. Navy. All real world experience that feeds directly into the survival grit and grounded tension in his stories. Welcome to the show, MJ.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to being here.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. My first question is always what made you decide to sit down and write thrillers? What was that catalyst for you?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. It just developed serendipity, I guess, is the best thing that you could say. I've always been an avid reader, as most authors I think are from the time I was tall enough to walk, pretty much. And parents were readers, family was readers, and I was in 2021. I was home at Christmas in South Dakota. My folks live in South Dakota. I live in the Pacific Northwest right now, and I was visiting them for Christmas. And on the way back, I stopped at the airport and I picked up a book, as I often do, and it was from a post-apocalyptic author, Robin Vandersis, and she was writing post-apocalyptic about a story that was set in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and I thought that would be interesting. I read it on the plane, and I started chatting with her on Facebook when I got back because I really enjoyed her work and enjoyed her story, and I was reading through that and chatting with her back and forth, and she's like, "Well, if you like my story, I'm writing a new book inside of a kind of a unique setting for a novel that's again based in the Black Hills of South Dakota, but the concept is something that to my knowledge has never been done before, and they took a post-apocalyptic world." And had sort of a central author that wrote the first book and set the plot and world building. And then they invited other authors in to write about the exact same situation, starting the exact same day in different areas of the United States. And the first one was set in Florida, and then they had one in South Dakota and California and Michigan. And I was like, that's such a cool concept. So I read the book and I read all the other books that they had published at that time. And I was like, this is just a unique thing. And so I was like, I wonder if I live on an island in the Pacific Northwest, and it's kind of a unique environment for a post-apocalyptic world. And I'm like, well, I wonder what would happen if I wrote a book based on where I live. And so I wrote the first three chapters, and I screwed up my courage, and I said, Robin, would you read this? And it's okay. You can be harsh and tell me if it's garbage or whatever. And she read it, and she said, we got to get this in front of my publisher. And so she sent it to Boyd Craven, who's Boyd and Lee run Raven Thorn Books, and it's a small indie publisher, sort of a hybrid model. And they read it and they said, this is great. We'd love to have you with us, and why don't you finish it and we'll get it published. And that kicked things off for me. And my first book came out in August of 2022. And I've got 8 others published now, and I'm on my third series now. I did 6 in the Vashon Island Fall world, which is the initial series I did, set in that world, and then we're doing a follow-up series that starts 2 years after that one. So it's a sort of a sequel series, if you will. So I have the first book in that series that's in editing right now with the publisher, and that'll be coming out hopefully in the next couple months. And then last year, I started a brand new series, and I wanted to do something a little different than post-apocalyptic, although I've done very well in that genre. All my books were fortunate enough to hit #1 on Amazon in the genre that we published them. And so then I was like, I always wanted to do an action thriller. I read a lot of Tom Clancy and Jack Carr and a lot of other, Brad Thor. And I'm like, let's try an action thriller. And so Lee Child, I love the Reacher model, and so I developed a story about a U.S. Marshal, Deputy U.S. Marshal that was born and raised 4th generation ranching family in Montana. growing up in South Dakota, I have a lot of affinity to sort of the rural lifestyle, cowboy lifestyle, um, I wrote the first two books in that, and they've done real well. Not as good as the post-apocalyptic stuff because it's a brand new genre for me, and I don't have a name there quite yet. But I'm writing the third novel in that series now. So yeah, it sort of uh, fell together about 4 years ago. Just I stepped in the right direction and got lucky. So
That's a amazing story. It's always to get lucky like that. The first thing out of the gate with just
yeah,
three chapters is
yeah,
kind of
amazingly
unheard of.
fortunate, and I count my blessings every day. And it's just I've fallen in love with writing, and honestly, I feel like something's going wrong if I don't write a little. Every day, I carry my computer everywhere I go, pretty much, and every free 10 minutes I have, I'm down, putting words down. So,
Yeah, that's the life of an author. I mean, once those ideas seem to start rolling in your head, they just keep coming out. Now, are you a pantser? Are you a plotter? Or you just
I am a full-on pantser. I've always enjoyed storytellers when it comes to authors. Guys who just tell a good story, no matter what the genre is. And I read across many genres, and Robert Heinlein is one of my favorite, and Louis L'Amour, and they just their characters are suck you in, and the plot stories they tell are interesting. And I just like to tell a story, and so that's the way I approach my writing. I sit down and I have kind of a concept idea of where I'm headed, but I sit down and I just start telling that story around what's going on in that situation, and it just kind of flows from there. Now, I will say that as I've knocked out book after book, I do more plotting now, particularly with the McKay's Justice series, which is my U.S. Marshal series. Just because with the action thrillers, there's a little more structure that needs to be involved on, weaving the different plot lines together and that sort of thing. And so I would say I'm probably still 80% pantser and 20% plotter. And I don't know that that'll ever change.
yeah, I think it's tough to get away from pantsing. I'm a pantser full on, and when I try to sit down and plot out a book, even just it, the three acts, trying to figure out all three acts, it just I don't know. There's something that like shivers inside of me that says this is not what you're supposed to do.
Yes, yes.
So
I know it's like, pulling teeth sometimes. And I find I have to sit down and write, other than just the initial contents. I sit down and write at least 5 or 6 chapters before I even go to any sort of outline. And then even then, my outline is super loose, and not until probably the last third of the book do I have any concept of how it's going to wrap up. So it's something just amazingly organic and unique about that process, that it just bubbles up, and the story tells itself. So
you hit that point. I get like 10,000 words in, and I'm like, oh crap, where's the story going?
yeah, well, actually, I've never panicked, but I do hit points where I get a little stuck sometimes, um, and sometimes I have to take a break for a day or two, and just sometimes I'll go bounce to a different chapter where I know that that's going to be needed later, and I'll sort of pre-write that chapter or whatever. But a lot of times I'll just kind of sit and let things mull. I sort of have this process when I'm in a book and I'm in writing, and um, I'll before I go to bed at night, I've always been a very visualization type of a person, and whether it's if I got something to do at work tomorrow, or whether I have something on my mind, I'll lay in bed at night and just spend the first 15-30 minutes or whatever just kind of thinking through things, and I send myself to sleep that direction, that way. And then the next day I get up and sit down and start writing, and stuff just gels. So and usually when I'm stuck, that's the best way. It just spend a couple days just kind of doing that sort of visualization process, and where would this go, and what could happen next, and what would be a cool thing. It helps too. I call it sort of my story hook cheat sheet, and in any concept I have, whether I'm writing or whether I'm not writing, if I have something cool, or I say, I was driving by in Oregon a couple years ago, and I was driving by the street, and there was this African American lady, homeless woman, which you don't see in that part of Oregon very often, but in a wheelchair. on the side of the road, and she had a pillow in her wheelchair, and she had a couple shopping bags, and she was just sitting on the sidewalk on the side of the road, and she had a pillow, and she was just totally sleeping. And I just thought that was such a visceral image of I won't say city life, but non-rural life I'm like, I gotta at some point write that into a book. And so I jotted that down on the form, and so I have this sort of list of things. And so every time before I sit down to first start writing a book, I just read through that just to kind of get little sparks in my mind on what I may want to add here or there. So
Yeah. Yeah, I do the same thing. You see something on the side of the road, or you have a conversation with somebody, and you think that's a good spark for a story, and you jot it down and come back to it later.
yeah, and even if it's just a reference, it's unique little flavor pieces like that help spice up the recipes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you slip them into the book, and I always think that they help improve the book. But I,
Absolutely.
so,
Well, so far, folks
yeah,
have liked it. So
yeah. So, how is Raven Thorn treating you? Are they you doing
they've
really well
been
for you?
fabulous to work with. I think I was the fifth. I might be one off either direction on that. I think I was the fifth author that they invited to this world, and that was really their first big world series. They had each written some books on their own, Lee and Boyd, Lee Bayless and Boyd Craven, and and so they had some experience, and they have some experience self-publishing, and Lee's an editor, um, and so I was kind of part of the home team, right, and one of the original five or six, and since then it's grown astronomically. I think in that world now there's, and I probably have the numbers, I'm probably betting low at this point, but 30 authors writing in that world, from 30 different locations, 30 different stories of their own, but inside this world. And it's been a great way to sort of generate readers, because readers buy into this world and they love the concept and love the world, and then they can go on to the next sort of series within a series, and read the whole event from a different perspective, a different lens, and the readers have just snapped it up and ran with it, and it's become a very quick and easy way for, certainly as a new author like myself, jumpstart yourself into getting a readership that follows you. So, and Raven Thorn has been fantastic. So, and they've been very supportive when I wanted to go do something outside of post-apocalyptic, and so.
So, are they handling all the back end for you, all the advertising? You're just concentrating on writing.
If I had a perfect world, that's exactly what would happen. I Every time I have to take time away to do something other than writing, I feel like I'm cheating myself, and cheating the readers. But the reality of the situation is, as an indie hybrid type of an author, they do. I do all the initial editing, proofreading, give them a pretty clean end copy. That's my goal anyway. And then they go in with the professional editors and do the final touching and touch ups and stuff. And then I go back and do a final read through and any final tweaks. And then they format. And we have a couple of folks that do covers for us. So I work with them, to get the covers the way that I'm visioning, and then they'll do the publishing, and then they do a bunch of promotion, certainly within their readership and newsletter lists, and they do some ads on Facebook and Amazon. But I supplement that with a lot of creative work. I do a lot of book trailers. I cut my own book trailers, some AI, some just blending of live promotion stuff, and I do a lot of Facebook promotion, both on my Facebook author page as well as some advertising as well, to sort of supplement some of those things.
Okay. I'm gonna jump out of the business end and go to a question that I ask a lot of authors because it fascinates me. Um, when I'm looking at your U.S. Marshal series, I see you have the name William McKay.
Yep.
Um, how did you come up with that name, and what does it mean to you?
Uh, that name, I was looking for I'm an to start set the baseline here. I'm an avid fan of Scotland. I've lived in the UK for a little bit, and I have been to Scotland 6 times now. And my wife and I just were there for 2 weeks in October, and I've always loved that culture and the history of Scotland, and I wanted to blend that in as part of the Scottish and Irish immigrants are such a key part of the American story and culture. The number of Scottish and Irish folks that came over in the 1700s and the 1800s really helped establish sort of what America is today. And so I wanted to tell a story of this fourth generation ranching family that came from Scotland. And so I started looking at, okay, well, I know I want them to have a Scottish name, right? A Scottish last name. And so I started looking at the clans and where they were in the country, and where they might have come from, and did a kind of the most elaborate backstory that I've had to build in a book at this point before I started writing, to kind of get it in my head where the family was and where they came from. And the McKays were ones that just fit from a cultural point of view, and where they came from and where I planned for their backstory. And because I want to do some exploration of that at some point, and I build some of that into the story as well. And so I'm like, okay, well, if I run with McKay, which I liked for another reason, is that it's fairly short, right? Short and easy. I always say short and easy when you're picking character names, because you're going to write them again and again and again and again. If you pick something creative and they're hard to spell and hard to remember how to spell, you're setting yourself up for trouble. So, and so in William, I just have always liked the name William, and it's relatively common in Scotland and in America as well. And obviously, you get a lot of derivatives of that. You can go Will or Bill or Mac for McKay, professionally. And so I kind of started with that premise and built on the name, and my first book in the series, Stormtide, is actually set in Scotland. I wanted just kind of a unique experience where you sort of a fish out of water type of experience, right? Because he's a veteran deputy U.S. Marshal. He's had 20 plus years on the job, and he goes to Scotland on vacation for a family commitment that he has with some family that he has back in Scotland. While there's a prisoner transport escape, that they're transporting prisoners from the U.S. to Scotland, and he's the only deputy U.S. Marshal in Scotland, and they kind of pull him on into duty from his vacation and say, help find these guys. And so that sort of sets a tone, and it was really fun trying to figure out how would a U.S. Marshal operate, a guy who's lived for 25 years with a gun on his hip all of his life, basically, but certainly all of his professional life. Now he's having to do his professional job without all the tools and all the systems he uses, and without all the firearms and all those things that and just really do it with his wits and experience.
Yeah, that's a fascinating look at a change of how you look. And I asked you this question about the character name because I had a gentleman on named Tom Tate, and the name of his character, last name of his character is McKay, also spelled the exact same way.
It's funny. Longmire, Craig Johnson just came out. His new Longmire book also has McKay's in it. I actually met him last fall at BocherCon down in Louisiana, New Orleans, and I joked that I'm going to have to, make sure I get a special mention in his book or whatever, because he copied my character name.
Yeah, names are tough because there's so many of them out there, and then we all want to pick that that one that there's so many chases and there's so many kind of names that we envision as thriller author or thriller character names.
Yeah, they have to fit that sort of mystique or personality of the.
Yeah, and the name does. If you're a pantser like me and you have a name pop in your head, you can automatically see that character
Yep.
and who they are. And if somewhere down the line you're forced to change the name, it changes who that character is in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And occasionally, I've only got 9 books under my belt, but I've had a couple of occasions where I'm like, I really wish I would have went a little different direction with the name. Never with the main character, but certainly with some secondary characters. That is like, it either didn't, the character developed in a way that it didn't necessarily match what I thought held the name, or just the name was annoying enough that I was like, I'm tired of writing it already, and I'm going to have to write it for a while. But
Yeah, I fell into that trap. I thought I'm going to have a character show up in this book, and he's just going to be a throwaway character for this book, and he's not going to appear anymore. And my main character's name is Ryan. This guy, I named him Rick because I could just envision him,
right.
and was in a whole lot of books, and I'm like, well, crap! Now you got Rick and Ryan, and
Yep.
I don't want my readers confused, and
Yep.
so,
No, and that's easy to have happen now.
yeah, you gotta pick the name that doesn't rhyme with whatever your character is, and
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. And it's, I have a harder time with last names. I find that occasionally I'll pick something that I think is unique and distinctive enough. And then, after I've wrote it for the 50 or 60th time, it's like, I wish I would have picked something a little shorter and easier to spell. But
absolutely. So how I want to know about training U.S. Dolphins, the U.S. Navy Dolphins. How'd you get into that job?
I went to school and got my degree at University of Colorado. Well, I started at University of Colorado, and then I transferred up to Colorado State at Fort Collins, and I got my degree in equine science, training horses. And I got out of school, and I worked for a few years as a wilderness outfitter up in the Rocky Mountains, packing and guiding elk hunters and that sort of thing. And then I just fell in love with scuba diving, and so I had moved to the West Coast and was living in San Diego on a sailboat, and working as a dive master on a dive boat for down there. And the winter was getting a little slower in business, and I was looking to pick up some other work. And one of our relief captains on the boat was like, "Well, it's too bad you don't have any animal training experience, because we're looking for divers." He worked for a company called SAIC, who has the contract for the U.S. military to train their dolphins and sea lions in San Diego. He's like, "Well, too bad you don't have an animal training experience, because you're a diver and you know what you're doing underwater, and we're looking for somebody with animal handling experience." And those two traits don't always match up very well: large animal handling and training, and scuba diving. And so I'm like, well, I trained horses for a living. I went and put in an application, and like I said, the skill and experience matched up with what they're looking for, and I did that for about 3 years, and it was an amazing job to work with them and get a chance to handle those animals, and they're just amazing creatures, and then you get the interesting part of working with the Navy and having the Navy guys come. And I worked a lot on the hospital and maternity unit, and so we'd work a lot with the both veteran dolphins that had been retired and then they were used for breeding animals, and then also with sometimes they get sick or injured, so we'd have the Navy guys and the handlers coming and working right alongside us on the docks, and the EOD guys and the guys who handle that dolphin stuff. So you got to see the work that they did day in, day out with the dolphins. And I was assigned a dolphin that actually had medals from the Vietnam War. The program's been around that long, and so the dolphin had actual medals from the Vietnam War, which is kind of cool.
Now, these dolphins were a lot of them are trained to search for underwater mines. Is that what you were working with?
Two primary roles. Underwater mines is one of the biggest and probably the primary role for them, and they're amazing at it. They can sense different kind of mines, and they'll come back and they'll indicate to the handlers, it's this type of mine, and then they'll lead the EOD team back to where the location is, and so the EOD guys can defuse the mines or what have you. Mm-hmm. So that's the primary role, and then they also do enemy swimmer detection. in the water, and so they'll patrol harbors, like where we have ships parked or whatever in Kuwait, or other places around the world. Then they'll, if they detect somebody that's in the water and nobody's supposed to be in the water, they'll come back and indicate to their handler. And what they do is they stick a device on their rostrum that looks like a man catcher, and it's a pair of metal jaws that are held open by a spring. And then they swim and they smash into the guy underwater, and they'll clamp it around their leg or their arm, and it's hooked to a cable back up on the boat. And so the dolphin pops up, and they turn on the winch and reel these enemy guys back up out of the water. So it's you do not want to be in the water around one of our boats, I guarantee, because those things are scary and they hit hard.
That's something I've learned just today. I didn't realize that they used them for that diver
Yep.
interdiction like that.
Yep.
So, yeah, I worked with a lot of EOD guys when I was in the Navy because I worked at the squadron that was did
Mhm.
mine countermeasures.
Yep.
So they're a fun group of guys to be around, and I made my main character in my books an EOD guy because they're kind of unsung heroes of the Navy force. All the SEALs get the attention, and
Yep.
EOD guys are in the background. So
Yep. Yeah,
so
I have a little funny story if we have time for
Go
that.
ahead.
So, dolphin trainer is kind of a unique thing to have on your resume or whatever. And
Yeah.
uh, I had a friend of mine that when he found out that's what I did, and he's like, "Really? No, you didn't." Yeah, and he's like, he started laughing. He's like, "When I was in college in California, he went to college in Santa Cruz. He's like, we would always go into the bars and impress the ladies and tell people we were with the SEALs or whatever, and uh, and he said and sometimes we tell them we're dolphin trainers or whatever. He said the only guys who could ever go into a bar and pull women away from the SEALs were the dolphin trainers, because girls like dolphins so much that they would. I never had that experience personally, but it is true. You get a lot of attention being a dolphin.
Well, that's one way to get a hookup, I guess. So my final question to authors is always, when a reader puts down your book, what do you want them to take away from it?
I want them to take away that they felt like they're stepping back out of a world that they were welcome in, and that just it pulled them in and wrapped them up, and they just can't wait to step back into it. That's always my goal, is that it should be immersive enough that they can't want to put the book down, and not just because they want to see what happens next, which is also a key component, right? But also just they love the world and the richness of it, and the characters become friends to them. And if something happens to the character, if I can pull a tear out of an eye, I've done my job, right? And I think that at the end of the day, if they set the book down and have felt like it touched them, even from just an enjoyment and telling the story, and that was a world I loved, and I can't wait to get back into it with the next book. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's you always want to be able to pull those emotions out of readers and keep them coming back. So
Yeah. I always love a reader that reaches out to me and say, I am at this point in the book, and I had to put the book down because I was crying so hard, or whatever the case may be. I have a fan that lives on the island here that was reading one of my books. I think it was book number 4 in the series, and I happened to be in Europe at that time, and I get a text from her. It's like, Dave died, and I'm like, because we have a mutual friend, Dave, as well. And I'm like, what happened, And then I realized that she was talking about it in the book, and so it gave me a scare. But she was very upset that David died.
that's you want to pull those emotions out of people and make them come back for more. So
yeah, absolutely.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Plot Recon, where thrillers get tactical. Thanks to MJ Witt for coming on and breaking down the mechanics of writing survival fiction from his real-world wilderness experience point of view. You can learn more about MJ and his books at mjwittbooks.com. If this episode hit the mark, share it, leave a review, and subscribe wherever you listen. And as always, you can find more episodes and support the show at plotrecon.com. I am Evan Graver. Thanks for listening. Stay sharp, write hard, and keep your fiction tactical.